Welcome, everyone, to the Physician's Road podcast. I'm Dr. Eric Tait. Today, we're on the path of personal development, and I'm so happy to have Dr. Mike Woo-Ming, a fellow physician entrepreneur here. As we said, he's a physician entrepreneur, in-demand speaker, author, and medical marketing strategist, specializing in lead generation, and he's overseen the funnel building of several multi-million-dollar online health companies. He's a graduate of the Mayo Clinic Family Medicine residency. He holds a master's degree in public health from the University of Michigan and a doctor of medicine from Wayne State University. He's the author of the industry guide, Marketing for Doctors, and has lectured on workshops on both B2B, which is business to business, and B2C, which is business to consumer, internet marketing to small businesses and entrepreneurs in the United States, Australia, Asia, and Europe. Mike currently helps physicians start their own cash-based practice as a practice management consultant and is the creator of the Insurance-Free Practice. He is founder of BootstrapMD, a career consulting company for physician entrepreneurs. So we want to invite Mike for coming on the Physician's Road podcast and sharing his wisdom with our audience. Mike, tell us how you got started as a physician entrepreneur.
Well, first of all, Eric, I want to say thank you for inviting me to the podcast. I'm honored. I've seen your name around. You always get great advice, and you're actually someone who I know knows what he's actually talking about on the physician forums. So again, I appreciate you spending the time with me. Being a physician entrepreneur, it's something that I really didn't think even knew existed, when I was back in medical school. All I know is that to make money, you need to have some type of product or some type of service. And the way that I got involved with business was I don't have an MBA. I don't have anything like that. But what I do know how to do is hustle. And when it comes to time to actually generate income. My father has been kind of sort of entrepreneurial. He's also a physician. He did some network marketing products back in the day, but nothing really kind of fit for him. Really, for me, I just kind of stumbled on being an entrepreneur. I started my first business in residency, of all things. At the time, I was an intern. My wife was pregnant at the time. She was a librarian at a local university. And, there are not too many millionaires who are interns in residency. And, I did the opposite of what the white coat investor recommends is I bought a house. And, my wife was pregnant, and then she was about to go on maternity leave. And my internship income was not going to be helping pay the bills. I was too young to do any type of moonlighting. And I didn't really know what to do, to be honest with you. But what did come about, this is in the mid-90s, was the internet. And I've always been kind of geeky, always been nerdy. I started my first website just kind of dabbling. And my residency director at the time, he wanted to get our residency better promoted. And one of the ways to do that was to have a website. And Eric, this is back in 1995, 1996. It was really the wild, wild west. This is when you could actually submit. Remember Yahoo? Yahoo was one of the big players back then. And they had a Yahoo directory. And this is where you could actually submit your website to the Yahoo directory. And I even remember getting an email from them saying, "Hey, thanks for this." And it was I built a residency website for our program. And long story short is I put back in that day, there was something called a guest book where people could leave comments, similar to how Facebook is these days. And people were asking about the residency program, but they were also asking questions like, "Hey, how did you get into medical school?" Or "How did you get into your residency? Mayo Clinic's pretty prestigious. How did you do that?" And so I was basically answering questions on this guest book on the time. Now, again, this is intern year, so there's not a lot of time. I'm working 100 hours plus, right? So I said, you know what? If I'm answering all of these questions, but I don't have the time to answer them. Why don't I just create a little book, a little guide? And I called it the Frequently Asked Questions About Getting Into the Residency Program of Your Choice. And it was basically questions that I kept answering. And I said, let's see what happens. And I typed it up I think I had a typewriter back in those days. I don't know. And then I went to Kinko's and I sold it for $15. You know, Eric, back then there was no PayPal, there was no Stripe, there was nothing like that. The only way that I knew how to get money was for them to write a check. And so I did a couple things that you never want to do. You don't never want to give your home address. And I said, here's this guide on my website. If you want it, it's $15, and just mail it there. You know, I didn't have a fax machine. I didn't even know how that all worked out. And I forgot about it. But here's the funny thing. I started to get checks in the mail for this $15 guide of how to get into your residency. And I was like, I think I stumbled onto something here. So this is outside of the residency site. I created this little website about giving tips to medical students or pre-med medical students how to get into the residency. And then my wife said, you know what? We're getting all these questions from these applicants, and a number of them were foreign medical graduates trying to get into the States to practice medicine. And they had at least the ones we saw, had really bad English. They were needing help on their personal statements. And I remember back in my medical school, there were these businesses that would help. I'm sure you've seen it. They would help students write their personal statement. And my wife says, I can do that. And she was pregnant at the time. She was doing this. And so what we did is we started to create products and services in this niche that we kind of stumbled onto. I'm not saying we got wealthy from it, but it really helped us out at a time when we didn't have any sources of income. I remember we bought a truck. I got a new truck out of it. My wife was able to get some sustainable income, and that was my first, quote, online business. And I created more products and services around it. I remember I created a program on how to interview. I got into USMLE questions and MCATs and all that kind of stuff. And it ran for about a few years, until I got into, the real world and work and graduated from residency. So I kind of put that and actually ended it. But that was my first entrepreneurial type thing. And what really had got me excited was, I was making money while I was sleeping. I was getting these checks. That was the first thing though I took out. So anybody listen to this, don't put your home address as to where you're going to get a mailbox or something like that. But that was my first foray into entrepreneurship as a physician.
Perfect. There are tons of lessons right there. And for the benefit of the listeners, let's go through some of those lessons, right? Because these are the things that are not taught in medical school. These are the things that are not taught for those who have an entrepreneurial interest outside of, even inside medicine, right? There are so many lessons that you just went through quickly and you stumbled upon. But I think one I want to kind of highlight and point out was one, there was basically a new trend. Well, even beyond that, right? One, there was a problem that your residency program had, right? So you identified a problem and you were the person that went and said, okay, I'm going to try to solve this. It already aligned with who you were in terms of you saying you're kind of techie and geeky, right? So you're like, okay, this is something I can do that I don't mind spending the extra time doing it because I enjoy it anyway. So there you did problem identification that aligned with who you were as a person, right? So it may or not have felt like quote unquote work. Another big thing that I take from what you did is that you jumped on a relatively new trend at an early standpoint. And so the interesting thing is there are whole guys right now that we know that literally have whole businesses around helping medical students, helping residents, you were literally kind of the forefather of doing all of that, right? And had it been something you decided to continue to pursue, there are people who right now, physicians who are literally living off of doing that right now. So you were able to trend spot at a very early age by finding another problem that people had. And you took it internationally, right? So you realized very early that the internet allowed you not just to service clients here in the United States. You figured out that, oh crap, we have foreign people this internet thing goes everywhere. So you were very much on the early cutting edge phase of kind of e-commerce, right? Because as you talked about it, there were no payment platforms. PayPal hadn't been created. So you were technically an early pioneer in e-commerce, right? And the other thing that I think is important is that you recognize what a lot of people I think don't, is that you got paid for what you were offering. Many people go out in the world and think, well, people should pay me for this. But until someone writes you a check or swipes a credit card, you really don't have a business. You have an idea. And until you've proven the concept that someone is willing to pay you for what it is you're giving to the world, you don't know if it's going to work or not, because we tend to live in our own heads. Were there any other kind of early lessons that you would kind of like the audience to know that you kind of figured out in that process?
I think what I figured out was I priced that pretty cheaply, that $15 frequently asked questions, because, think about it, Eric. You're helping someone try to get into their residency. How much is that worth to them, right? That's going to be hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars if they become a successful specialist physician on there. So $15 was pretty much a drop in the bucket. So what I learned early on is kind of proof of concept that there's actually a need for it, and then I raised the price. I forgot what I raised it to, like $100. But then also what I did was, now that I had a product, I didn't just leave it at that. I created, surrounding products. What else do they need? If they're interested about, getting into the residency, and they're also interested about how to interview, how to help them with their personal statement, how to help them with, the MCAT or whatever they need to be taking to get in there. So it's basically, getting a customer, but then surrounding them with, related products and services after they know me, like me, and trust me, right? So then I can create all of these other different programs on there. Now, like you said, if I could have kept that going, there are businesses literally, as you mentioned, that are doing really, really well in that space. But I think one of the things was, things changed, right? My interest in that, I could have pursued that even further, but I had other things that I wanted to do with my life. But I still think that it is something where every year you're going to go through this. The need for people who want to get into medical school residency, it's not changing on there. So that still could be a viable business. So don't be afraid if there are other competitors out there. If you can find your niche on it that you feel is not being served, you might find the foundation of a really successful business.
Oh, absolutely. They say that if you don't have a competitor, either you're just super early or it's just not a viable business. And so having competitors oftentimes let you know that people are willing to pay for that product or service. So don't ever be afraid of competition, because in the end, you're going to be speaking to your own group with your own voice, and you're going to create your own tribe through that particular process. So now take us, Mike, through your transition. So, okay, you finished residency. What happened next? And then how did you transition from that standpoint?
Okay, so now this is going to be pretty cathartic for me because it definitely took a turn. So what it did got me excited for. So I graduated in residency in 99, 2000. You might be a little too young for this, but for me, this was the big .com boom. So you had all of these different businesses that are out there that were creating these online businesses. Pets.com, a website on dog food. This is when, Amazon was coming up, and all of these little different businesses, website businesses, the venture capital was throwing a lot of money into that.
Oh yeah, no, I was actually in business school at the time. So yes, I remember this vividly.
Yeah, so you were probably thinking, "Hey, I'm ready to graduate. Let's go. Let's get a hold of this." And it was crazy. So I had a startup that I was involved in. I was working full time as a doctor, but I was passionate about getting involved in a health startup. And I started a website, and basically it was kind of like an Ask the Doctors type website where people could ask their questions either through email, and then I had these doctors who would answer these questions, and it was a cash-based type service. They weren't in a relationship, physician-patient relationship or anything like that, but just some general advice, third-party thing. What ended up happening, I was involved in a startup here in San Diego, And then I went to, I was flown to New York. I went into this big eHealth summit in 2000, and I got together with another health startup. And basically, long story short, is they kind of took over my website, but then that startup just tanked. I've got a lot of shares of that company. I'd be happy to, if you want to use that as toilet paper, I think that's probably good. But, I invested at least good. It was a good thousands of dollars that I invested into that. But, from failure comes success, right? But I didn't let that deter me. And after that, I just went through a series of other different projects. Nothing really filled in. I remember I was involved in we were building a med spa in Belize. I'd bought this island, and we built a hyperbaric chamber for diving. So I put money on that. So I could tell you all these things, what you can't do, what you can't do, buddy. But what it did was, I always think there's always opportunity around the corner from failure. And when that startup tanked, and I said, there's still people who are asking for health information. There's still got to be a way of kind of monetizing it or having a profitable company out of this. And what that led me to doing was getting involved in online marketing. And I wanted to kind of salvage that website, so I wanted to learn how to market it. And this is a few years down the road. So long story short, I ended up going to a conference, and I ended up investing in a mentor who helped me with starting my own online business. And then this was a few years after that, I started creating these ebooks. So I created an ebook. I wrote an ebook on, my mentor says, do what you know. And of course, I was a doctor at the time. Again, I'm still working full time and doing this. And I wrote a book on how to save money on prescription drugs. And it was basically just more tips. Back then, this is when like Canadian pharmacies were getting involved, and it was much cheaper to get pharmaceutical drugs and going generics than the regular U.S. drugs. So I wrote a little ebook on it. And how much money, Eric? I'm gonna put on you. I gave you my prestigious bio. How much money do you think I made in the first 6 months of this ebook?
How much were you selling it for?
I was selling it for $20.
$20. Okay. And this is this is to consumers at this point. In 6 months' time?
Yes.
Ooh, when you were just starting out?
Months. Yes.
I'd probably say less than $5,000.
I told you, I went to the Mayo Clinic. University of Michigan? No. Okay, you're correct. I made $100. So I sold 5 copies of this book. But I say this to my students is the important part was I made money while I slept. I mean, those $100 when I was sleeping. Now, of course, I'm not talking about the time it actually took to write the book and such. They took me about 6 months. But getting your first dollar online, realizing that there are other people that if I did this on my own, I didn't have some big venture capital behind me. I did this on my own. I said, hey, I got something. So what I did is I created a series of ebooks back then. And then I went outside of medicine. I just did what I was interested. So I wrote books on, what did we do? We had one on how to get your destination wedding. One was on pets and dog training. We had one on event planning. I had a book on how to become a private pilot. Now, I'm not a private pilot. What ended up happening was I was starting to find out what people were searching for, and I was creating these little ebooks that kind of were about 60 to 80 pages. Now, I kind of made a little fib here. I didn't actually write the books. What I did was I hired a freelance writer at the time that I had found, and all he wanted to do was write. And I paid him for his time writing. And the thing back then is, there are these writers who weren't making a lot of money, and they were willing to write a 50-page book for very inexpensively at the time. So long story short, as I created a little publishing empire, I started then supplementing that with, back then it was called Google AdSense. It's still around, where
Oh, so
I
before
would
we go
have these
there,
blogs.
so let's,
Yeah.
before we go there, because that'll be the next transition, is to kind of how to use
Uh-oh.
technology to leverage it. So let's go back through the lessons
Yeah.
of that portion. So you went to New York, they took your site over and it tanked. Now, what lesson did you learn through that process?
What lessons that I learned was kind of have an idea who's actually behind the startup. I'm not going to deface the guy, but he was also a doctor who was involved on it, but he didn't really have a lot of business experience. And back then I was straight out of residency. I was like wide-eyed. I got that, all this internet startup money. I'm seeing these things on the news, so I wasn't involved in that. But I really, when you're going to partner with somebody, you really want to kind of find out is what's kind of their track record, on doing it. What is involved on it. And still at the time too, again, it was the wild, wild west. There was venture capital people they were throwing money on. I remember a site on barbecues, and they were throwing millions of dollars on selling barbecues online. And I didn't really know better, but I think the biggest thing was although I was sad that I lost this money, it was a considerable amount of money. It didn't really deter me. I was still passionate about making money outside of just working 50 to 60 hours a week. I know there was a way that I could do it, and I think the biggest lesson that I've learned as being an entrepreneur is you just have to be pig-headed. You have to have that pure perseverance. That things eventually will work, but you just have to be acceptable in taking some type of risk, which unfortunately or fortunately for many doctors are risk averse, as we talked about in the past.
Yeah.
But for me, it's always been let's see what happens and where does this go.
Got it. And so now you pivoted to the online marketing space. You said, okay, I have this piece of intellectual property, this site, and I want to learn how to better market it. But you said something very profound, and I'm also a firm believer in it. You said that you went and found a mentor to teach you the process. Walk us through that, why you did it, and give us kind of a few short points as to why you did that. How did it help you? How did it help to transform you? And, what was the outcome of that?
Yeah, and it was just I had one mentor. It actually was when I'm looking back, I probably had a handful of kind of mentors that I actually worked with. The first thing that I always say is success leaves clues, and if you have someone who's got a successful company, you need to be willing to invest into working with them. I think there was a post I saw recently where this doctor wanted to start up a DPC, a clinic. And he wanted to know, what's the best way to do it. And people are telling him, well, you gotta have a billing person. You got to get your insurances. You got to get that all credentialed and everything like that. And my thing was, why don't you find out if you want to do it? Find someone who's actually got a successful clinic that does what you want to do, and work with them. See if they want to mentor you. And pay them for their time. So I invested money in not only money, but I also invested my time. I actually worked with this very successful entrepreneur. I got to see what the back end was, what was actually making him the money, and he coached me. And I continued these days. I continue to invest in mentors. I just think this year I've invested like $40,000 to $50,000 just on investing, because I'm not so smart that I'm thinking about this all by myself. If you want to become a successful surgeon, you're not going to watch it on YouTube, how to do a surgery, right? You're going to work with that person. You're going to be on call with them. You're going to see what's actually working so you can be the best surgeon as possible. It's the same thing with business. And people think you can get everything online is free on there, but you don't know who's actually teaching you these kinds of things. If you're really serious on this, I was very, very serious. I wanted to create a successful business. I'm investing money, times, and working with this person to really show me the ropes.
Absolutely. So I'm the same way. I have mentors for almost everything that I've ever done in my life that's outside of medicine. And because ultimately, if you look at it, our clinical years, our residency is just an apprenticeship with mentors That's all it is. And
Mhm.
when I talk to business people are clear that they get coaches and mentoring. It's when physicians, it's interesting because when you see physicians who are trying to do things that aren't necessarily medically related or are trying to become more efficient in their medical practices, they're very loathsome to actually pay people to help them do that. We term that the super S syndrome in our world, where kind of the super self-employed person where nobody does it better than yourself. And so I'm just not going to pay. I'm just going to do it myself, not realizing that one, you're a prisoner of your own knowledge. Two, you're going to waste a ton of your own time in the process of doing that. So I'm glad you expounded upon that. And then the last part of that transition that you had that I picked up on and talk about is kind of widening your market, because you got out of just talking to medical people, the thing that you knew, to go to a wider kind of base of people. How did you make that decision? Was it helpful? And then did you decide to ultimately come back to the market that you knew, or kind of what was that process?
I know you're a scholar of kind of the greats of personal development like me. I follow guys like Jim Rohn, Brian Tracy, and I think it was Jim Rohn, or maybe it was Napoleon Hill, who says, you were kind of the product of the 5 people that you hang around with.
Yep.
And at the time, I was hanging around with all of my other physician burnt out doctors, and who were very, at times could be very negative and didn't really have a great outlook on life. So I wanted to find people who not only were more financially successful, but in other aspects of your life. And I know you cover this in the Physician's Road about I believe you have 5 areas that you kind of look at in terms of not only financial, your physical, spiritual, etc. So I'm looking for people who they can get me into the next level on there. If I'm being hung around by people who are making 5 and 6 figures a year, I want to hang around by people who are making 7 or 8 figures a year. That's only where that I can grow. So I'm a firm believer on doing that. So what that entailed me was not just going to a conference and getting me CME money, getting me CME, but going into, financial investing conferences, online marketing conferences, online business conferences, personal development type conferences, because that's where I want to go. And my income wasn't changing by hanging around the same people that were kind of stuck, and I couldn't grow any further. So that's why I created conferences where I could find people who are making a lot more money. And I'm not just wanting to focus on the money, but just having, whether they get a great spirituality that I have yet to, that's one of the things that I've been kind of working on myself, that I wanted to go to. So that was a big change. And it just so happened there wasn't a lot of doctors at these type of conferences, but it really opened my mind into what else was out there in terms of finding, whether it would be happiness or whatever you want to pursue, a better lifestyle that I was searching for.
And that's a perfect transition, because now you are doing conferences and you're creating conferences that allow physicians to experience much of what you've experienced. And so let's talk about that, because you're doing Bootcamp MD. And it's really about kind of helping physicians kind of in the entrepreneurial space. And so let's talk about Bootcamp MD and, why most doctors don't start a business, and kind of how are you going to help them in this conference make that transition. And then full disclosure, I'm going to be speaking at the conference. Thank you for inviting me. I'm absolutely looking forward to doing it. But talk about that. Talk about what you've seen with physicians and how you are crafting a conference to allow them to get the experience that you've had in your life.
It's kind of the same methodology of what we discussed about kind of finding a niche. Find that there's a need out there that you need. My goal was to help fill it. The conference is really a labor of love for me. I found that there are a lot of conferences for doctors, but very, very, very few focus on doctors who want to start up their own business. I remember when I used to want to speak more at these medical conferences, and I was actually told that I shouldn't be talking about these type of things, talking about opportunities outside of their career. It was not in their best interest to have me talking about these things. They kind of wanted the doctor to do what they do, see all the patients, and that's it. That's all we wanted them to do and sell, the drugs or whatever they wanted us to do. There was very few conferences out there that kind of fulfilled the need that I wanted in actually experiencing kind of the joy of having the business, as long as with the trials and tribulations on it. And the reason why I created Bootcamp MD is being an entrepreneur can be a very lonely business. I have multiple businesses. I've got many employees, but I'm kind of running the show. And it's kind of like I said, I want to create something where I've got doctors who are making 7 figures, 8 figures, or more on there. And there's really no conferences that I know that kind of fulfills that. So kind of my goal with Bootcamp MD is we've got many doctors who want to start their own businesses, but they don't know which is the best way to do it. And they'll spend tens of thousands of dollars on a franchise, which is good as it's possible, that you can do. But I see that there are many ways that doctors can get a better education. Many go your route with an MBA. Unfortunately, many don't do anything with that MBA. And there's really nothing out there where we focus on physicians and entrepreneurs, and focus in a way that focuses on creating your business. There are some conferences out there talking about investing in certain businesses, and this is not what Bootcamp MD is all about. This is about what the name of my company is about. Bootstrapping is about creating a sustainable business. And my foray was through the internet because I think that's the best equalizer. It allows you to reach people from around the world, through advertising like Facebook and Google and such, that, you couldn't do this 30 or 40 years ago. So I know that businesses that are created this year that are going to go to 5 and 10 years could be worth tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. And if this little conference that I'm creating could be the spark of it, that's kind of my my thing is my goal is I love helping other doctors. I've helped doctors who've become really pretty big. I've got some students who've started from their own clinics. They started where they were in managed care and they hated what they were doing. I kind of worked with her. Now she's got a very successful weight loss clinic and expanding to telemedicine. And she says she's as happy as she's ever been. We've got other doctors I've worked with that have started nonprofits, $1 million companies, and now this work on the business network and just in their business on there. Again, we're not saying that entrepreneur is the end all be all, but in terms of if you're looking to increase your wealth, I think it's the easiest way to do it because we're not limited by just how many patients we see. We've talked about it in the past. We're creating these little businesses that kind of run on its own. These little, that little $15 checks that I got in the mail was kind of my spark to do it. And I know that there are other businesses out there. And so we're having this conference coming up in San Diego called Bootcamp MD in January that I'm looking to find physicians who are maybe have already started a business and want to connect with other doctors and meet with like-minded people because doctors, we trust other doctors, or there are doctors out there who've got an idea, but just like you said, it's just an idea. And I talked to them a year later and it's still just an idea. And nothing ever grows from that. And I know that there's a need for it. And that's why I created it. This certainly is something that, I'm just doing on my own. There was really a selfish need because I know that there are physicians out there who've got that. They've got the ideas. They're smart. But for whatever reason, they're putting these self-limiting beliefs that prevent them from doing it. And if you want to learn in an environment that kind of is a safe and kind of molds and encourage you to do it, then you need to be at Bootcamp MD.
And I think
that's like Eric and entrepreneurs.
Perfect. I think that's a perfect way to end this podcast. And what we'll do is we'll put the link to the Bootcamp MD on thephysiciansroad.com/bootcampmd. And we'll have all the information there where people can click on the site and get information about it as well as register. And so give the dates again and where it's going to be.
It's going to be in San Diego in January 26th, January 27th. All the information's there. The hotel is right there. It's really close to the airport. I believe they offered a free airport shuttle. It's happening. It's not Super Bowl weekend, so you're okay on there for you sports fanatics on there. But if you're looking to make a significant transition into 2019, and you want to kind of start off with big, I think this is the best way to do it. If you are a physician who is serious, wants to start a business and meet and connect with like-minded other doctors, this is where to go. I'm going to be sharing you not only kind of my strategies, that I've done. I'll give you the inner workings of a new business that I've created. That I envision it's going to be a 7-figure business. I'm in kind of an open book. I'll be sharing you, how I'm doing it. And I think the most exciting thing too is connecting with the like-minded doctors, because going to conferences, as you know, it doesn't end at the learning doesn't end at the conference. It learns in the relationships that you build, the texting and the communications afterwards. I've built multi-billion-dollar businesses simply by just connecting with other like-minded individuals, starting a business by going to conferences and events like this.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in going to conferences. So I want to thank Mike Woo-Ming for being with us on the Physicians Road podcast today. Again, we're on the path of personal development. And so, again, I will be a speaker at the conference. Again, it's in San Diego, January 26th and 27th, BootstrapMD, and just go to thephysiciansroad.com/BootstrapMD. I'd like to thank all of you for listening to the Physicians Road podcast today. Please go to iTunes and rate and review the podcast, as well as subscribe. And you can check us out on Facebook. We have a Facebook group where we can have much more in-depth conversations about this and other types of subjects. Thanks again, Mike.
Thanks again, Eric.